Good evening and welcome to Zero Time. I'm your host, Maria Z. Now, as we've previously discussed on Zero Time, there is a clear climate agenda at play here. Australia recently passed the Climate Change Bill of 2022, and we know that the state of South Australia was thrown into a state of emergency over the imminent threat of climate change recently. And we've made it quite clear after extensive reading of these documents, such as the Climate Change Bill and the Paris Agreement of 2015, which the bill is based on, that there seems to be zero suggestion as to what actually needs to be done to combat this so-called threat of the changing weather, which has been happening for thousands of years. However, there is one solution that has been proposed and experimented with for generations now. You may have heard of cloud seeding, which is essentially weather modification. And we're being told that things like racism, gender equality, being able to identify as a tree stump, or having the right for children to have the right to mutilate their genitals are all the major threats that humanity is facing, and climate change being right at the top of that list. And of course, we have scientific experts such as Al Gore and Greta Thunberg preaching to us that if we don't do something to stop the climate crisis, we would have all been dead 10 years ago. However, saying that, with many illnesses such as autism, dementia, and Alzheimer's on the rise, with little known cause for this phenomenon, one aspect must be taken into consideration. What we believe here at Z Media may be the elephant in the room, or should we say, the elephant in the skies. Chemical trails. Now, many will scream, conspiracy theorists, anytime the words chemtrails are mentioned, claiming that the increase of lines that we're all seeing in our skies are just condensation trails left by jet engines flying at high altitude. But there is much documentation and evidence leaning towards the conspiracy fact that this is simply just not the case. What you're seeing right now on your screen are photos that have been taken by Z Media in metropolitan areas. There are thousands upon thousands of these images circulating from past till present, with the opportunity to take images like this being endless, given the fact that this is what our skies look like most of the time. Every day, in some places. And anyone with an ounce of common sense would likely agree that these are not standard flight paths that you're seeing, and certainly not standard cloud formations. Now, weather modification dates back to the early 1900s, with many government operations such as Project Cirrus from 1946 to 49, Project Cumulus from 1949 to 1955, Project Skyfire from 1953 to 67, and many more. And we'll make a special mention of Agent Orange here, which, like many of these experiments, resulted in adverse events in pregnancies, birth defects, deformities, and more. In an effort to play God, many of these experiments have been cloaked under the guise of bringing rain to drought-stricken territories, or taking rain from flood-affected areas and so on. But this is happening. It's still happening. And if you don't believe that this is going on, believe this paper published from the University of Tasmania, authorised by the university's librarian in 2017. Enhancing the weather. Governance of weather modification activities in Australia. If you go down the page to the abstract, it says, weather modification by cloud seeding refers to technologies intended to manipulate the weather at a local scale. Over the last 70 years, Australia has played a leading role in cloud seeding research and development. Australian states have developed frameworks to promote opportunities and manage risks from cloud seeding. So we're acknowledging here that Australia's been doing this for 70 years, and it's very important to notice that there are risks with cloud seeding. Weather modification governance was studied in the United States context, but there has been little consideration to date for Australian frameworks. This article provides a contemporary analysis of the weather modification governance in Australia and assesses the extent to which legal and policy frameworks meet future governance challenges. It goes on to say that, in this paper, they're analysing the cloud seeding experience in Victoria, New South Wales, and Tasmania and are identifying common features in their governance arrangements. They go on to point out gaps in current regulatory frameworks and call for a reconsideration of cloud seeding governance in Australia. So again, we're admitting here that this does happen, or at least it was in 2017, analysing the cloud seeding experience in Victoria, New South Wales, and Tasmania. These are the states that we're saying within this paper published on the University of Tasmania website that cloud seeding and weather modification does occur in our country. Let's have a look a little bit deeper into this topic. This can be found on the legislation.vic.gov.au website, the Rainmaking Control Act of 1967. And as you can see here, it's been in force since 2013. So let's have a look at this document. Now, there is some very interesting language contained within the Rainmaking Control Act of 1967, and we wanted to take you through some of it. But first, we thought we'd help define rainmaking operation. According to them, rainmaking operation means the seeding or nucleating of clouds by artificial means from a manned aircraft. That seems pretty straightforward. Well, on page 4, it goes on to talk about the authority to carry out rainmaking operations. Listen to this. Whenever it appears to the minister to be desirable or in the public interest to promote rainfall or otherwise modify natural cloud processes in any part of Victoria. And some of those reasons listed are for improving primary production, okay, improving water storages, we understand that, reducing fire danger in a forest area, or for any other sufficient purpose. Who decides what the sufficient purpose is? Well, that's the minister, the unnamed minister. The minister may authorise the carrying out of rainmaking operations in respect of the area or areas concerned. Now, one would assume that that minister knows what they're doing, that there would be regular reports provided to and by that minister that would be publicly available so that it's all transparent and above board. We'll get into that in a moment. Authority to make arrangements. Where the minister authorises rainmaking operations under the foregoing provisions of this Act, he shall issue his authority to some person or body under his control to make arrangements for carrying out those operations. Well, we'd like to see that authority in writing. Apparently, it has to be done in writing, signed by the minister and addressed to the authorised officer or body. We'd like to see it. We'd like to see what's included. What are the reasons? What are the other sufficient purposes, considering we don't have bushfires happening at the moment. I mean, potentially we could be trying to improve primary production. Okay, that's fine. Let's see the authority that's been issued to these people for these rain seeding projects. Now, what is this covered under? Well, it says here, the minister shall cause a copy of every authority issued under this Act to be forwarded to the minister administering the Water Act of 1989, the minister administering the Conservation Forests and Lands Act of 1987, and the minister administering Part 9 of the Local Government Act of 1989. So there is a copy of every authority that's being issued under this Act, and it is being forwarded to the ministers administering these acts. What's really interesting here as well is that cloud seeding in Victoria to induce rainfall in another state. It says here, at the request of the minister of an adjoining state administering any act corresponding with this act, the minister may authorise rainmaking operations to be carried out in Victoria to promote rainfall in the adjoining state. So who does that go to then? Which minister is asking for this in the adjoining state? Where do we find the reports? Now, it also says here on page 6 that it is an offence to carry out unauthorised rainmaking operations and that the penalty could be $1,000 or imprisonment for 12 months. Now, you're guilty of an offence if you've carried out unauthorised rainmaking operations. What constitutes an unauthorised rainmaking operation? I presume it's one where The process hasn't been followed. You haven't submitted the documents. They perhaps haven't been made publicly available. I mean, what constitutes unauthorized? Because we've done quite a bit of digging here at Z Media and we can't find these reports anywhere. Also important to note is that the minister may order discontinuance of unauthorized operations. So where it appears to the minister that any person or body is carrying out or is about to carry out rainmaking operations not authorized under this act, the minister may, by order, require the person or body to discontinue or refrain from commencing the rainmaking operations. So who is it that has the capability to conduct rainmaking operations that's conducting these without authorization? How did they come to be able to do this? How did they get the equipment to carry out rainmaking operations? And what made them think that they could go and do it without authorization? Interesting. It goes on to say that any person or body to whom an order under this section is addressed who fails to comply with the terms of this order, so on and so forth, shall be liable to a penalty of no more than 1,000 for every day upon which he continues to carry out rainmaking operations in contravention of the order. How many times has this happened in order for them to need to put this into the legislation? This one's golden. No liability in respect of authorized operations. Listen to this. Neither the minister, any person or body authorized by the minister to make arrangements for carrying out a rainmaking operation, or any person carrying out rainmaking operations authorized by the minister under this act, shall in any way be liable in respect of any loss or damage caused by or arising out of the precipitation of rain, hail, sleet, snow, ice, fog, or mist in consequence of the rain-making operations so carried out. It goes on to say a person carrying out rain-making operations outside of Victoria and in accordance with the law, if any, corresponding with this act and in force, where the operations are carried out, shall not in any way be liable for any loss or damage caused by or arising out of the precipitation in Victoria of rain, hail, sleet, snow, ice, fog, or mist in consequence of the rain-making operations so carried out. So you are admitting here, we do this. We carry out these operations. It's completely at the discretion of whatever minister is calling the shots here. We don't make our reports publicly available. We've got them, apparently, they say. And there's no liability if anything goes wrong. If death occurs as a result of our rainmaking operations, as it did in Tasmania some years ago, there's no liability. If we destroy property, there's no liability. We're creating rain. We're making rain that could cause devastating effects, and it has done in the past, and there's nothing you can do about it. Even if 50,000 odd people are displaced from their homes as a result of our experimentation. It goes on to say that reports on rainmaking operations need to be made available. It says that under this act, the person or body authorized to make arrangements for carrying out rainmaking operations under this act shall furnish a report in writing concerning those operations to the minister in accordance with the provisions of subsection 2 or upon request in writing made by the minister. We want to see those reports. This is important stuff. We're helping the climate here. We want to see what we're achieving through these rainmaking operations. We want to know all the great things that we've achieved through rainmaking operations in this country. It goes on to talk about the fact that where the operations will be completed within 14 days from the commencement thereof, within 48 hours after the completion of operations, where the operations extend more than 14 days. Why are we cloud seeding for more than 14 days? Interesting. From the commencement thereof, not later than a Wednesday in each week with respect to operations conducted during the week, ending at midnight on the previous Saturday, and so on and so forth. These are specific days. Are the rain-making operations happening between those time frames? Are there any further risks? What have we found? Is this completely safe? If it is, we'll stop talking about it. We'll stop talking about the lines in the skies. We'll stop talking about La Nina. We'll get into that in a moment. We'll stop talking about all of this because everything's above board and we've got access to the reports and we can see what great work you're doing to combat climate change. We can't wait to see the results. In 2007, you've got Malcolm Turnbull pumping $10 million into a rain-making gamble. We were talking about this all the way back then. So if it's no big secret that rainmaking occurs, why are we not talking about it? And does it ever go wrong? Well, yes, it does. In 2016, Hydro Tasmania, as reported by the ABC, was asked to explain a cloud seeding project that occurred in a catchment a day before flooding. They knew that flooding was going to occur that week, and yet they still went ahead with the cloud seeding. It goes on to say, Tasmania's government-owned energy company has been asked to explain why it conducted cloud seeding over the Derwent River catchment the day before flooding began this week. Those floods resulted in devastating outcomes for the farmers in the area. So we have to ask the question, why did it occur? And is it still happening? Some more alarming language has come out of the United States in the past. I want to show you something. What you're looking at here is weather as a force multiplier, owning the weather in 2025. It is a report that was presented, or a research paper that was presented to the United States Air Force by a list of names here in August of 1996. Now, some of the language in this report is extremely alarming. It says, quote, "Weather modification is a force multiplier with tremendous power that could be exploited across the full spectrum of war fighting environments." Scary stuff. Now, considering the overwhelming evidence in our skies that this is occurring, who exactly is the war against? In more recent years, we've seen climate experts advocating for poisonous substances to be sprayed in our skies via modified private jets in order to fix the climate crisis, whatever that is. Here's one of those psychopaths.
You could actually spray sulfuric acid in the stratosphere 20 kilometers over our head and use that to stop the planet warming up in a ugly tech fix.
You could spray something into the atmosphere to change.
Spray pollution into the atmosphere to stop it warming.
How do you do this?
You start with a fleet of modified business jets and say 20,000 tons of sulfuric acid into the stratosphere every year. And each year you have to put a little more. And this doesn't, in the long run, mean that you can forget about cutting emissions. We will need to rein in emissions.
We'll get to it eventually. But in the meantime, we're shrouding the Earth in sulfuric acid.
So people are terrified about talking about this because they're scared that it will prevent us cutting emissions.
Right, and also that it's sulfuric acid.
We put 50 million tons of sulfuric acid in the air now as pollution, and it kills 1 million people a year worldwide.
Okay, but it'll be better if we put more in.
We're talking about 1% of that.
1% more, we're just killing 10,000 more people.
You can do math.
What happens to the sulfuric acid after it's sprayed? Does it just stay up there?
No, it rains down, but it's a tiny addition to what we're already doing.
Is there any possible way this could come back to bite us in the ass?
It actually turns out to be an old idea. This was known since President Johnson.
You ever look at those planes up there? They have contrails behind them. Maybe all those planes with the contrails, maybe they're actually spraying chemicals into the atmosphere right now, and Uncle Sam isn't telling us.
It seems extremely unlikely.
That the United States is not telling something to its citizens? That seems extremely likely to me. Read the newspaper.
Geoengineering expert David Keith says, don't worry about it. We'll just kill thousands of people. It's fine. This is totally normal to be appearing on a mainstream TV show and just talking about how we're going to kill thousands of people, and we're just going to have a bit of a laugh about it as well. And you'll find that the attitude of most governments is very much the same when they dismiss these theories. But I want to show you some more of what David Keith has to say about the future and the harm to humans and what he thinks about your grandkids.
The little picture is from a nanofabrication study, which shows you can make very high quality, and do this in just a jet in a very simple way, make high quality alumina particles just by spraying aluminum vapor out, which oxidizes. So it's certainly in principle possible to do that. There's a big literature that's already looked at that. And you could do that by either building new versions of these aircraft or even re-engineering existing aircraft. So there's some ideas of that. So you go to an engineering firm and you want this done. They don't say this is hard or unusual. They say, okay, yes, we could do it. Aerosol geoengineering looks like it is so cheap that the cost is basically not going to be an issue. That means that implementation decisions will be risk-to-risk decisions. The risk of doing it against the risk of not doing it. And it makes the problem of how we govern it fundamentally harder and different and novel. So I've told you that it's cheap to deliver materials to the stratosphere, and I'm convinced that's true. I don't think that will change. But I think the more we do research, the less easy this will look, the more complicated the environmental effects will look. And that's a good thing, because right now it looks too easy. So I think that if we do more research, we're likely to find out that it's harder and more complicated than we thought, and that the side effects are harder to manage, and that's a healthy outcome that will make it easier to do the management. Of course, the opposite reaction is possible. It's an empirical question, how people will actually react to knowledge about this. Another reaction is to say, if these crazy scientists are so concerned about putting CO2 in the atmosphere, they want to think about these things, then that might actually mean we should be more serious about the risks of CO2 in the atmosphere. And by the way, it's not really a moral hazard, it's more like free riding on our grandkids. And by the way, it's not really a moral hazard, it's more like free riding on our grandkids.
It's not really a moral hazard, it's just more like free riding on our grandkids. That's what they think about your future generations. It's not really a moral hazard that we know that this is going to kill tens of thousands of people every year, the fact that we're doing this. It's just what we have to do. We just have to kill people off now. And what do they have to say about the dangers of the projects that they're conducting, of geoengineering, of modifying the weather to fight the so-called global warming crisis and rising sea levels? Let's not forget the rising sea levels and the fact that, elites or self-proclaimed elites like Barack Obama keep buying up waterfront properties. I mean, aren't they scared of the rising sea levels? Why are insurance companies still insuring homes that are by the sea if the rising sea levels are such a threat? Back to this clip of the risks, and then we'll keep going.
The question is, what would be the effects of these materials on human health if they came down into the stratosphere, in particular small particles and aluminum?
So the collaborators of mine working on the aerosol scheme are actually folks from Carnegie Mellon who focused on human health impacts.
Just to clarify, so 10 megatons of aluminum dumped into the atmosphere would have no human health impact.
So let me be more careful here. To separate out the toxicological, so the alumina we've only begun to research and published nothing. Alumina we've only begun to research and published nothing.
Well, we just don't know. We don't know what the dangers are. We haven't published our findings yet. This is how these people answer you. And what happens when you question the government about this? Well, you mainly get laughed at or you get zero response. Here's an example of the New Zealand Parliament responding to one of their own members of government questioning spraying the skies.
Our knowledge, I don't have any personal insight into that, other than to say that I worked in government at pretty high levels in the White House and at state government. I'm personally skeptical of that. But obviously you never know what you don't know.
Chemtrails. On the internet, they are cited as proof of the government creating clouds to combat global warming.
They claim the American government, with the secret approval of the national government, is covertly using jet aircraft to spray population centres with aluminium, with barium and with strontium so as to reduce people's humidity and reduce the global population. The apparent motive behind this conspiracy theory is one world government.
Order, I cannot hear.
Mr. Speaker, I want to assure the House that both my ministry and my colleague, the Minister of Health, who have received correspondence on this issue, that this conspiracy theory does not have an iota of truth, and that the trails observed from aircraft simply come from jet engines.
Question number 9. Order.
And I think what an appalling example it is of the new Foreign Affairs spokesperson for the Labour Party that she's spreading conspiracy theories about the United States government.
I think the House has heard sufficient.
So why is this topic so important? Well, as Australians, we've been told to expect rain until February of 2023, La Nina, crazy weather events due to climate change, but we deserve to know whether these cloud seeding experiments that produce reports that you can't find and some unspecified minister is overseeing this are having an impact on our weather today. We also deserve to know whether the projects that are being done in Victoria, the experiments, I should say, being done in Victoria are impacting other areas. For example, the city of Lismore. And are these projects contributing to a greater agenda? See, in 2019, the mayor had lobbied for a city deal to transform Lismore by 2030 into a smart city. It says here, Lismore Mayor Isaac Smith has backed calls by Regional Capitals Australia for the government and opposition to commit to 10 city deals worth $100 million during the federal election campaign. It goes on to talk about a 10 million city would change the face of Lismore by 2030 and cement the city as the economic engine of the Northern Rivers. A city deal would also signal to business investors that the area is strategically important to the government. Well, surely our government wouldn't weaponize the weather to destroy an area and displace thousands of people from their homes in order to transform a city or a region into a smart city, would they? Well, what's required for Clara's plan to transform cities into smart cities? This is something that we don't really hear much about in the news. We're told that these are going to be livable cities. Australia needs a future-focused plan to manage overcrowding and affordability. And our vision is to build the world's most livable, sustainable, and connected smart cities. So how do you do that? I mean, surely in order to build a smart city, you've got to destroy the existing city. For example, the city of Lismore, there's quite a bit that needs to go into transforming this city in order to become a smart city, right? I presume there'd be quite a bit of destruction of property that would have to, existing property that would have to occur, just like when you go and build a new road, when the government tells you you need to move out of here so that we can build a new road, like the buyback scheme that's currently being offered to Lismore residents. How else will you transform the entire city? And is the government spraying that's occurring in other states impacting places like Lismore? Or is this being done on purpose? Multiple reports are surfacing from all over the world about different places accusing other nations. For example, Iran has accused Israel of using cloud seeding technology to steal their rain. It's not a secret that governments are doing this, and as we saw in that United States Air Force report, it's not very hard to use this technology as a weapon in war. Here's the article now. Weather control. Iran accuses Israel, UAE, of using cloud seeding technology to steal the rain. This is just the 2nd of September 2022. Iranian officials are accusing Israel and the United Arab Emirates and their other enemies in the Middle East of using geoengineering warfare technology to deprive Iran of its water resources. They're calling this warfare technology. So isn't it a concern that we have legislation in Australia allowing for warfare technology? I mean, this language should be alarming to all of us. And again, we're not saying that certainly the government has gone and destroyed the area of Lismore and displaced 50,000 people from their homes in order to build the smart city that they planned 3 years ago. 4 years ago, 3 years. But it certainly is possible. I mean, we've seen what else they're capable of over the past 2 years, controlling every aspect of your life. Oh, now they want you to have a digital ID where everything you do is tracked and traced. And the smart cities will help us do that because there'll be 5G on every single corner and you'll be plugged into the Internet of Things and the Internet of Bodies, which is an even more terrifying concept than the Internet of Things. If you haven't seen my recent interviews on these topics, I recently presented on InfoWars about this. My recent interview with Karen Kingston, everybody needs to see that. It's up on the interviews page of zmedia.com right now. What does this actually spell? What do smart cities actually spell? Well, they spell complete and total control. They spell your thoughts being monitored, your emotions being monitored, biometric sensors that are now under your skin. How did they get there? How did we get biometric sensors under our skin that would enable the smart cities that we live in that apparently we're not being flooded or having our weather modified in order to create these smart cities, to destroy existing infrastructure and rebuild new infrastructure and, just offer buyback schemes to people so that we can take their property and rebuild, build back better. Surely the dots are connecting for everyone now. Surely the dots are connecting for you all by now. But we have found some freedom of information requests on this topic. To the best of our knowledge, there was a response from the Department of Jobs, Precincts and Regions, who apparently holds the records of what has been reported to this ambiguous minister, with no documentation being found. We've reached out to 2 ministers from the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning in Victoria to find out more information. This will be an ongoing story. We believe that it is one of the most important topics that needs to be covered in Australia right now, just because of all of the coincidences that seem to line up perfectly with Agenda 2030. We'll be keeping tabs on this, as should you. Continue to tune in to Zero Time each week at 8 p.m. for further updates on the elephant in our skies.